The acclaimed author, Niccolo Machiavelli, once stated, "A son can bear with equanimity the loss of his father, but the loss of his inheritance may drive him to despair." According to this statement, many people love money more than their families. Even though the love of money may not be wise, it is still a fact the majority of people do love it, and the thought of losing it brings them great despair, especially if they are losing a majority of their rightful inheritance. Men feel as though their inheritance is theirs, and no one should have the right to touch something their dead relatives laboriously worked for or put risky investments in to make. Everyone, whether rich or poor, deserves their entire inheritance and should not owe any to the government. If you feel you disagree with this statement, I would like you to ask yourself why. Why does the government have the right to take someone else's gift? Allow me to talk about another country for a moment, who formerly required beneficiaries to pay their inheritance tax, but in 2004, in order to boost their economy, they discontinued all inheritance taxes. Sweden, also sometimes known as Europe's socialist paradise, was in a difficult recession during the turn of the century. Its unemployment was shooting through the roof, and entrepreneurs began leaving the country in protest of this death tax. Two CEOs of the largest companies in Sweden, IKEA and Tetra Pak, decided to take their companies and leave Sweden. The inheritance tax has already cost the government a whopping $200 billion in lost revenue, and their economy was falling lower and lower. In order to reboot the economy and the nation, the government abolished the inheritance tax. As a result, company owners can now focus on company growth versus focusing on one day having to pay the death tax to keep their companies alive. Companies expanded, payrolls and business purchases increased, tax revenues increased, and the economy began to recover, and over 4,000 Swedes have moved their companies back to Sweden. Doesn't this sound quite familiar? A dying economy, a high unemployment, and companies afraid of failing? Looks like a socialist nation made the right decision and are reaping the rewards for it. And now the citizens of America must stand up and make the right decision. According to a reliable source, one of the richest... excuse me, sorry. The best reasoning behind this is that the money that is not paid the inheritance tax will be kept in the pocket of the inheritor, it'll be reinvested into the economy, it'll boost the economy, and I yield my time to my summation.
Arguably one... Evan Ford, the state of Tennessee. Arguably one of the most famous and wealthy men in the history of the United States, Andrew Carnegie once stated that it is the blessed who live rich and it is the greedy who die rich. It is the responsibility of the rich to give away their money before they leave, before they leave this earth, according to this quotation. The problem is that this estate tax was an incentive that created certain things like, let's see, Vanderbilt, who had a huge tycoon, to create things like Vanderbilt University. Also, Carnegie created the famous and esteemed Carnegie Hall as a result of the estate tax. And removing this would remove an incentive for great movements towards charity. Also, there will be an issue that comes up with this bill of whether or not there is double taxation on this money or not. I would like to address this issue in sort of an example, in a specific example. This type of estate tax is on things that have been invested and have been gaining value for a long time. For instance, I invest $10,000 in a house. Over 30 years during my lifetime, this house gains value. So by the time I die, it's $200,000. This money has never been taxed, and when it is passed down to the next relative, then it is taxed. Therefore, they're being taxed, okay, let's say $60,000, $70,000. That is a small amount compared to the amount of money that they are making over over amounts of time. It hasn't been taxed for 30 years. If it had been, then there would have been a bigger issue with this. I just urge you to see the reasoning behind this estate tax, especially considering that it generates such an important amount of revenue considering a time of economic downturn. With over $20 billion at this point, and also considering the fact that the federal government will soon take over state inheritance taxes, therefore boosting the amount of money that the federal government will receive from these taxes. So with all this in mind, especially the fact that this is an encouragement to the wealthy to pass on their money wisely and keep it in businesses and places where it's not just simply accruing value, but also creating jobs, I strongly urge failure, and I yield my time to the chair.
Mark Shaw, Republic of Texas. I'd like to begin by addressing something that a previous delegate said. Vanderbilt created one of the most prestigious universities in the country. However, that was by his own accord. Whether or not that was motivated by the estate tax cannot be confirmed indefinitely. Furthermore, Carnegie not only created, well, I'm assuming that he created Carnegie Hall, but he also established libraries and schools both in the United States but also in the United Kingdom. Although the United States may have used this money from the inheritance tax to fund these things, I highly doubt that they would have been used to fund things in the United Kingdom. Furthermore, the primary problem with the inheritance tax is it assumes that the inheritor immediately has a substantial income to pay for this tax beyond the revenue that's accrued through interest. For example, let's say someone inherits an inheritance of about $1 million, yet their income prior to the inheritance was only $100,000. Now, reasonably, at a 55% tax rate, I believe, it's not reasonable for this person to be able to pay the estate tax and hold on to their inheritance and create a higher income indefinitely. There's also the possibility that another company will come in, take over the property that was given back to the federal government because they can't pay for it, and the money still goes into the economy that way. I would like to close with a quote from Machiavelli, as did the proposal author. There are three classes of intellects: one which can comprehend, one which can appreciate what the other comprehends, and one which can do neither. The first is great, the second is good, and the third is useless. So if we cannot comprehend why people have this attachment to their inheritance that rightfully came to them through lineage, then we should at least appreciate the fact that this depends on their livelihood. Thank you.